Have you ever felt like life is pushing you into corners where the choices ahead seem uncertain? In today's story, we dive into a moment where an unexpected act of kindness transforms everything. It's a story about love, resilience, and the courage to do what feels right, no matter the odds. Stay with us for the next few minutes, and let's uncover this journey together. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like and share. Let's spread these moments of hope to others. The billionaire's son could never walk until the black maid did the impossible. The turning point in Maya's life. Maya Williams stood at the doorstep of the Whitmore estate, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted the hem of her uniform. The massive stone pillars on either side of the entrance seemed to loom over her, a silent reminder of the vast world she had entered. The sunlight reflected off the white marble courtyard, but to Maya, everything felt cold and distant. She had been here for months, but the truth was, she still didn't feel like she belonged. She wasn't like the other staff members. Maya wasn't just here to clean or cook. She had been brought into the Whitmore family's inner circle, entrusted with the care of little Ethan Whitmore, their son. Ethan was no ordinary child. Diagnosed with a rare condition that had left him unable to walk, he had spent his early years in a cycle of failed treatments and endless therapy sessions. Charles Whitmore, his father, had spared no expense, hiring the best doctors and specialists money could buy. Yet nothing had worked. Ethan still couldn't walk, and the hope that his parents once held had slowly faded. When Maya first entered the Whitmore household, she had been just another face in the background. The other servants saw her as nothing more than a lowly maid, and even the family treated her with a certain distance. But Maya wasn't there just to serve. She was there to help Ethan. The child, whose pain and frustration were palpable in every step he failed to take, needed something that no doctor, no amount of money could provide. He needed someone who believed in him. Maya had no formal training in physical therapy, nor did she have any fancy degrees hanging on her walls. What she did have, however, was an unshakable belief in Ethan's ability to walk again. While the doctors had their charts and technical knowledge, Maya had something far more valuable, a heart full of compassion and a willingness to fight for Ethan, even when the world told her it was impossible. She often found herself whispering words of encouragement to him during their sessions together, as she helped him take his first, wobbly steps. It wasn't the cold, sterile approach that the therapists used, but something more human, more real. Ethan's small fingers gripped her hand, his eyes filled with fear and uncertainty, but Maya never let him go. She stood beside him as he stumbled, steadying him with her presence, letting him know that he wasn't alone in his struggle. And slowly, Ethan began to improve. The small victories, the ones that had seemed impossible just months earlier, became his reality. He would take a step, then two, then three. The joy in his eyes, the wide grin that spread across his face every time he succeeded, was worth more than any paycheck she could ever receive. But Maya's success with Ethan didn't come without resistance. Charles Whitmore, a man of immense wealth and pride, had never believed that a maid like Maya could accomplish what the best specialists in the world could not. In his eyes, she was nothing more than a tool, someone to watch over his son, not someone who could truly make a difference in Ethan's life. The tension between Maya and Charles had been simmering since the day she started working in the Whitmore household. Charles had a deep-seated belief in the superiority of his wealth, his education, and his bloodline. To him, Maya was a nobody, someone who had no business interfering in his family's affairs. And when it became clear that Maya was making progress with Ethan, something that the doctors and therapists had failed to do, Charles's anger began to boil over. One afternoon, as Maya was helping Ethan take his first steps near the koi pond, Charles appeared, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. His face was a mask of cold disdain, and his words cut through the air like a knife. "Get out, you filthy black maid," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "What do you think you're doing to my son?" Maya froze, her hand still gently guiding Ethan's unsteady steps. The words stung, but she refused to show weakness. She had dealt with racism and prejudice before, but never from someone she had trusted. She had believed that Charles, as a father, would want what was best for his son. But this This was different. Charles's eyes narrowed as he watched her, and before Maya could respond, he moved toward them with purpose. In one swift motion, he grabbed Ethan out of her arms, pulling him roughly away. The boy gasped in surprise as his father's forceful grip lifted him into the air. Maya stumbled backward, her feet slipping on the wet marble, and she fell into the koi pond, the cold water splashing over her. Maya stood, drenched and humiliated, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of Charles's gaze on her, his judgment piercing through her skin. But she didn't back down. She couldn't. She had come this far for Ethan, and she wasn't going to let this man crush everything she had worked for. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I was only helping him walk." Charles's laugh was hollow, mocking. "Helping him? Don't insult my intelligence. I've spent millions on the best specialists alive. Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Stanford. They couldn't get him to take those steps. But you—" He looked her up and down with cold contempt. "You think you can do what they couldn't? You think your skin gives you some special magic the rest of us don't have?" "It's not about magic," Maya began, her voice calm but firm. "It's about skill." "Skill," Charles sneered. "It's about education, discipline, refinement, none of which you have. You're here to clean floors, not to play savior." Maya's heart ached as she listened to his words. He didn't see her. He didn't see the dedication she had for Ethan, the love she had for this child who had no one but her to believe in him. To him, she was just a maid. But Maya knew the truth. She knew that no amount of money or education could replace the one thing she had, her heart. As she stood there soaked and humiliated, she made a silent promise to herself. She would never stop fighting for Ethan. She would never stop believing in him. And one day she knew Charles would see that too. Maya's resolve and the beginning of change. The following days after the incident near the koi pond were filled with tension. Maya's heart still ached from the humiliation Charles had subjected her to, but the fire that had been ignited within her only grew stronger. She had long ago accepted the harsh realities of life. Prejudice, ignorance, and disdain were just part of the world she navigated every day. But for the first time in her life, she was up against something far greater than societal expectations. The father of a child, she was determined to help. Maya spent the next few days in silence, focused solely on Ethan. Every smile from him, every small victory he achieved, made her more determined to prove that she wasn't just a maid or a charity case. She was the one who was helping him walk again. It wasn't the therapy or the endless stream of experts who had gotten him to this point. It was her belief in him, her commitment to his success, and the way she worked with him every day, gently pushing him forward when he doubted himself. Despite her resolve, the tension between her and Charles continued to build. He stayed distant, his cold demeanor unchanging. Maya saw him watching from a distance during their sessions, his eyes narrowed in judgment, but she refused to let his arrogance deter her. She had seen what he couldn't, Ethan's progress. Every step Ethan took was another small rebellion against the constraints of his condition, another triumph over the years of hopelessness that had clouded his life. One afternoon, Charles approached Maya in the hallway, his posture rigid, his voice colder than usual. "You're not going to get him to walk, Maya," he said, his tone laced with skepticism. "I've thrown everything I can at this, and nothing has worked. Do you really think you can succeed where the best minds have failed?" Maya, though still carrying the weight of his earlier words, stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "It's not about who has failed," she replied calmly. "It's about who's willing to keep trying. And I'm not going to stop trying until Ethan walks on his own." Charles sneered, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than he intended. There was something in her voice, a steadiness, a quiet confidence that he couldn't ignore. It made him pause just for a split second. "We'll see," he muttered, turning on his heel and walking away. But Maya didn't feel the sting of his words anymore. She was past that point. What Charles failed to understand, what he couldn't grasp in the cold, rigid world he had built for himself, was that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs came not from textbooks or degrees, but from a belief in the impossible, from a simple act of trust and love. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Ethan's steps grew more confident. The once uncertain child, who had been unable to walk, now walked with purpose. His laughter filled the air as he took step after step, his small hands grasping onto Maya for balance. She guided him with a gentle touch, never forcing, always encouraging, her eyes focused solely on him. One afternoon, Charles watched them from the shadows of the courtyard. His arms were crossed tightly, his jaw clenched as he observed Ethan and Maya. There was something different now, something he couldn't deny. Maya was making Ethan walk, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of admiration for the woman he had so casually dismissed. Still, he was unwilling to admit it. His pride, his belief that only his way was the right way, kept him from giving in. He had spent years building his empire, and to admit that someone else could do something he had failed to do felt like losing control. But the sight before him, his son taking those steps, not with the help of experts, but with the help of a maid, was starting to crack the shell of his own delusions. The breakthrough came when Ethan walked across the courtyard to the bench by the koi pond without falling. Maya had been standing nearby, her eyes full of pride, her heart swelling with each step Ethan took. She had guided him along the way, but now, in this moment, it was all him. Ethan had done it. He had walked, unaided, to the bench, a feat that had seemed impossible just a few short months ago. Charles, watching from a distance, felt a sudden rush of emotions he couldn't name. He was proud, but he was also ashamed. Ashamed that he had underestimated this woman who had done what he couldn't. Ashamed that his pride had blinded him for so long. And most of all, ashamed of how he had treated Maya, who had done more for his son than he had ever dared to believe possible. Later that evening, Charles sought her out in the kitchen. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with something softer, something that looked like guilt. He leaned against the counter, his hands resting on the edge, his gaze fixed on her. "Maya," he began, his voice hesitant. "I was wrong." Maya looked up from the kettle, surprised by his words. "About what?" "About you," Charles admitted, his voice low. "I underestimated you. I thought I knew what was best for Ethan, but you've shown me that I don't have all the answers." Maya's heart tightened, but she didn't let herself soften completely. She had learned not to expect too much from Charles. Not yet. "I'm here for Ethan," she said quietly. "Not for you." He nodded, his eyes dark with the weight of his own realization. "I know, and for that, I'm grateful." The silence between them stretched on for a moment before Charles spoke again. "If you're willing to stay, I'd like you to be a permanent part of Ethan's life, not just as a maid or a caretaker, but as someone who's truly part of this family." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected this. In all her time working for the Whitmores, she had never imagined that Charles Whitmore would offer her a place in his world. But here he was, offering her not just a job, but a chance to be part of something bigger, something that had once seemed impossible. "I'm here for Ethan," she repeated, her voice steady, "and I'll stay for him." Charles's gaze softened just for a moment before he turned and left the room. Maya stood there, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She had made it this far, and with Ethan's progress, with the support she had now, she knew the road ahead was going to be long and hard. But she was no longer fighting alone. For the first time, she felt like she had allies. She wasn't just the help. She was someone who mattered. The first signs of respect. The days following Charles's tentative admission of being wrong were filled with a strange new energy at the Whitmore estate. Maya knew the road ahead would not be simple. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily mended. But she could see that Charles was trying. And as much as her heart wanted to deny it, a part of her hoped that, somewhere deep down, he wanted to change. The changes in his behavior were subtle but noticeable. He was beginning to pay more attention to Ethan's progress, asking questions about his therapy, and even standing by to watch him take his first steps of the day. However, despite his growing respect for her abilities, the tension still lingered. Maya knew that Charles's pride wasn't something that would evaporate overnight. The internal battle within him wasn't just about admitting his mistakes, it was about undoing years of learned behavior. As much as he had shown humility in front of her, His words and actions still hinted at the deep-seated biases that had shaped his worldview. But Maya was patient. She had learned long ago that change came in small increments. Each morning, she worked with Ethan on his balance exercises, guiding him carefully through each step. He was eager, his face lighting up every time he successfully completed a task, whether it was walking a few more steps or reaching for a toy on a shelf. His enthusiasm made the long days worth it. But Maya couldn't help but notice that Charles had started to observe them more closely. It wasn't just a glance here and there. Charles, despite his stoic nature, had begun to ask about Ethan's progress daily. He didn't just look at Maya like a servant anymore. He was trying to engage with her on a different level, as though he was finally realizing her worth wasn't just as a caretaker for his son, but as someone who truly understood him. It was this shift that made Maya hold her breath, not knowing whether it would be sustained or just another passing phase. One afternoon, after another successful therapy session, Charles approached Maya while she was preparing a snack for Ethan in the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, his frame tall and imposing, his arms crossed as usual. For a moment, he simply watched her, his eyes tracing her movements as she cut fruit and arranged it neatly on a plate for Ethan. Maya felt the weight of his stare, but instead of shrinking under it, she continued her work, setting the plate on the counter with a calm composure. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her, not anymore. "He's doing well," Charles said, breaking the silence. His voice, though still slightly distant, lacked the edge it once carried. "Yes, he is," Maya replied, turning to face him. "He's strong, and he believes in himself more each day." Charles nodded slowly. "I've been watching him. He's not the same boy he was when you first arrived. You've done more for him than I ever thought possible." Maya didn't respond immediately. His words, though rare and simple, carried more weight than he might have realized. For a long time, Charles had dismissed her, never believing she could accomplish what she had. His acknowledgement, however brief, meant more to her than she could express. "You've given him a chance," Charles added, a slight vulnerability creeping into his voice. "A chance I couldn't give him." Maya felt a sharp pang in her chest. "No one gave up on him, Charles. You didn't give up on him. You just didn't know what he needed, and that's okay." Charles looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe I didn't know what he needed," he said quietly, "but I know what he needs now. And I'm not going to let anyone—" His voice trailed off, as if he was struggling to find the right words. He cleared his throat. I want to make sure he keeps moving forward. I don't want anything or anyone to get in the way of his progress." Maya met his gaze, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of triumph. For the first time, Charles wasn't speaking as an authority figure. He was speaking as a father, deeply concerned for his son's well-being. "I know," Maya said softly, "and that's why I'm here, to help him be the best he can be." Charles nodded once, then turned and left the kitchen. Maya stood still for a moment, her hands resting on the countertop. She had spent years working with children, but there was something different about this situation. With Ethan, she wasn't just guiding him through the motions of physical recovery. She was teaching him to believe in himself, to fight through the uncertainty, to take each step with courage. She was giving him something that no one, not even his father, had been able to give him: belief. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner, Charles found Maya in the living room, sitting by the fire as she watched Ethan play with his toys on the rug. He approached her again, this time with a new, more serious tone. "Maya, I've been thinking," Charles said, standing in front of her. "What you've done for Ethan, it's not something I can just ignore anymore." He paused, looking down at his feet for a moment before meeting her eyes. "I think you're right. I can't continue to treat you like the help. You've earned your place here." Maya felt a flood of emotions rush through her: relief, frustration, and a deep sense of pride. She had waited so long for this moment, for Charles to see her as more than just someone hired to care for his son. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, though she was still processing his words. Charles took a deep breath, as if he were preparing for something difficult. "I need you to know that I see you now, for everything you are, not just as Ethan's caretaker, but as someone who has changed his life. And for that, I'm grateful." Maya's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. enough to show that Charles was beginning to understand her value, not only as a person but as someone who had changed the course of his son's future. It was a step in the right direction. "Thank you," she said again, this time her voice softer, more vulnerable. "I'm doing it for Ethan, but I'm also doing it for me. I've learned so much from him, how to be patient, how to persevere. He's a fighter." Charles smiled slightly, his expression warm, though there was still a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I think I'm starting to see that." The evening passed in a quiet but comfortable silence. Charles didn't speak much more, but his actions, his willingness to sit next to Maya, to listen to her when she spoke about Ethan's progress, spoke volumes. Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in herself. She had never given up on Ethan, and now it seemed she was beginning to earn Charles's respect. The road ahead would not be without challenges. There was still much for Charles to learn, and much for Maya to teach him. But for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope that things could change. They were both on the same team now, working toward the same goal, and that, she realized, was all that mattered. The subtle shifts of power. As the days passed, Maya settled into a routine that was slowly becoming her own. The stiffness in the air between her and Charles seemed to dissipate bit by bit, though a quiet unease still lingered. She could feel it, a subtle shift in the power dynamics at the Whitmore estate. Things had changed, but the change felt fragile, like a new house built on soft sand. Every action, every word was now measured, as if they were both aware that one wrong move could send everything crashing down again. In the beginning, Maya had been uncertain about how things would unfold. Charles was still Charles, the patriarch, the figurehead of a family that had built its wealth on generations of power and influence. But now, it seemed that Charles was beginning to question everything he had built, at least when it came to his relationship with Maya. He was learning, albeit slowly, that there was more to a person than their background, their wealth, and their status. Maya had shown him that. But Charles's journey toward full humility was going to take time. Despite his admission that Maya had been right about Ethan's care, and despite the shift in his behavior toward her, there were moments when he would fall back into old habits. Moments when his sense of pride and control reared their ugly heads, reminding Maya of just how hard it would be for him to shed years of ingrained bias. For now, however, Maya remained patient. She couldn't afford to be anything else. She had learned long ago that in order to win a battle, you had to pick your moments carefully, choosing not only your words, but your actions. She knew better than anyone that Charles's transformation wouldn't happen in a day. If anything, it would require constant nurturing and subtle guidance. So, she gave him space to make mistakes, while continuing to gently steer him toward the right path. One late afternoon, Maya found herself sitting in the garden with Ethan, helping him practice his balance along the stone path that meandered through the manicured estate. Charles was nowhere to be found, but she wasn't surprised. The man was a creature of habit, and he had retreated into his study, as he often did when life became too chaotic for him to process. Ethan, as usual, was full of energy, his small frame darting in and out of the garden, his hands stretched out to help him stay steady. Maya watched him with pride. It was impossible not to feel proud when she saw how far he had come, how every day brought new signs of progress. Ethan was determined, and that determination fueled Maya's own resolve. She had come to love this boy as if he were her own flesh and blood. His victories were her victories, his struggles were her struggles, and she would fight for him, no matter the cost. Just as Ethan was about to take another step, a voice broke her focus. "Good work today, Maya." Maya turned to see Charles standing at the edge of the garden, his expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken to her much that afternoon, but she had noticed his lingering presence in the house, his eyes following her from a distance. She smiled politely, her voice steady. "Thank you, Charles. He's doing great. I'm proud of him." Charles nodded, though he didn't approach her. Instead, he stood at a distance, his hands in his pockets. For a moment, there was a silence between them. Maya couldn't help but notice the change in him. He wasn't as distant as he once was, but there was still a sense of restraint, a wall he hadn't fully broken down. "Have you thought about the fundraiser next week?" Charles asked, his tone casual but pointed. Maya blinked, momentarily surprised. "The fundraiser? she repeated, her brow furrowing. She had heard about the event but hadn't expected Charles to bring it up. It's important, Charles continued, his eyes flicking toward the ground before meeting hers. It's an opportunity for Ethan to show his progress to the public, to prove that the work we're doing here is worthwhile. Maya could see where this was going. She had known from the moment she had joined the household that Charles was driven by appearances, by how the world viewed him and his family. But what he was really saying was that this fundraiser was more about his image than Ethan's progress. I understand, Maya said carefully, keeping her voice neutral. Ethan has made incredible strides, and I think it's important for people to see that. But I also think we need to be mindful of how he's feeling. Crowded events can be overwhelming for him. Charles's face tightened, and for a moment he looked frustrated. I'm not asking for your opinion on the guest list, Maya. I'm telling you it's important. We're not just showcasing Ethan. We're showcasing the progress that has been made thanks to the work we've all done. Maya felt a flicker of anger rise within her. She had worked tirelessly for Ethan, day in and day out. But she knew that the battle she was fighting wasn't just for his progress. It was for her own dignity, for her place in this family. I'm here for Ethan, Maya said, her voice firm. I'm here because he needs me, not because of the optics of a fundraiser. Charles didn't respond right away. He seemed to be processing her words. But before either of them could say anything else, Ethan came running toward them, a huge smile on his face. Look, Maya, I can run all the way to the bench, Ethan exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. Maya's heart swelled with pride as she watched him run, his steps steady but still slightly wobbly. She moved to catch him as he reached the bench, her hand gently guiding him the last few steps. Charles watched them both, his expression softening just a little. For a moment, he looked like a father watching his son take his first real steps toward something bigger than himself. Ethan sat down on the bench, his face glowing with pride. Did you see that, Dad? I ran all by myself. Charles stepped forward, his smile small but genuine. I saw, Ethan. I'm proud of you. Maya stood by the bench, quietly observing. She knew this was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. For the first time, Charles's words were not laced with contempt. They were words of encouragement, of pride. He was beginning to see Ethan for who he truly was, a child who deserved to be celebrated, not ignored or belittled. Thanks for helping me, Maya, Ethan said, looking up at her with gratitude. Maya smiled warmly. You did all the hard work, Ethan. I'm just here to guide you. Charles nodded once more, his gaze shifting between Maya and Ethan. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the house. Maya watched him go, her thoughts swirling in a mix of uncertainty and hope. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but today something had changed. A crack had appeared in the armor of the Whitmore family's cold exterior, and though it was small, it was a crack that she believed could eventually break wide open. For now, though, she focused on the small victories. And today, Ethan's victory was enough to keep her going. The battle for truth. The following days seemed to pass in a blur of quiet tension. Each morning brought a new routine, one Maya had come to rely on for its sense of order and control. Ethan was progressing steadily, his small victories continuing to accumulate, but beneath the surface, Maya could feel something stirring, an unease that didn't seem to dissipate, no matter how much she focused on the boy's recovery. It was clear that Charles, for all his apparent changes, was still navigating the tension between the old Whitmore legacy and the new reality that was slowly taking shape within the walls of his estate. As much as he wanted to believe in Maya's abilities, as much as he had started to see Ethan's progress firsthand, there was a part of him that clung to the weight of his family's expectations. The old way, the way that had kept them safe, protected from the outside world, was not something he could easily abandon. Still, Charles had made progress. He was beginning to see Maya not as an outsider, as the help, but as a vital part of Ethan's life and well-being. It was a slow realization for him, one that Maya knew she would have to nurture. She couldn't force him to change. All she could do was continue to be there for Ethan, continue to prove through her actions that her commitment was genuine. And yet, there was always a shadow hanging over them, the looming threat of Margaret. Maya had known, from the moment she stepped back into the Whitmore estate, that she wasn't just fighting for Ethan's progress, She was fighting for her own place in the world, for her right to be seen as more than just a servant, more than just someone who cleaned floors and cooked meals. And as much as she had hoped that her presence would be enough to change things, she knew the truth. Margaret would never accept her. Margaret would never see her as anything but a threat. The confrontation at the gala had only reinforced that. Margaret's insidious ways, her cold, calculating demeanor, had pushed Maya to the brink. But in that moment, standing before the gathered crowd, Maya had realized something. This wasn't just about defending herself, it was about defending the truth. Maya was tired of hiding. She was tired of pretending to be something she wasn't. She was tired of the lies, the manipulation, and the subtle ways in which people like Margaret tried to control others for their own gain. And she wasn't about to let it happen any longer. Charles had given her the courage to speak out at the gala, to stand up for herself and Ethan. And now, in the quiet of the estate, Maya knew it was time to take the next step. She couldn't continue to let Margaret chip away at her dignity, at her worth, every time she spoke. The morning after the gala, Maya found herself in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Ethan. She could hear the soft sounds of Charles moving about upstairs, his footsteps steady and measured. She knew he was still processing everything that had happened the night before, the way he had stood by her, the way he had backed her up in front of the guests. It was a step in the right direction, but Maya knew better than to think that one moment would change everything. Change, after all, was a long and difficult process, and Charles had years of ingrained beliefs to undo. Ethan came bounding into the kitchen, his face lit up with excitement as he ran to the counter. "Maya, can we go to the park today? I want to show you how far I can walk without holding on to you." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Ethan had come so far in such a short amount of time, and it was all thanks to his own determination. She could see it in the way he carried himself now. More confident, more willing to take risks, even if those risks were as simple as stepping away from her and trusting his own legs to carry him. "Of course, Ethan," Maya said, setting the plate of scrambled eggs down in front of him. "After breakfast, we'll head over." As she watched him eat, her thoughts drifted back to the events of the past few weeks. The gala had been a turning point, but it had also marked the beginning of a much larger battle. Margaret wasn't just a force to be reckoned with. She was a dangerous one, and Maya knew that in order to protect herself, to protect Ethan, she had to continue to fight. As she cleaned up the dishes, the phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID, Charles. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steady. "I need to speak with you," Charles's voice came through, low and urgent. "Meet me in the study." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She knew that tone. Something was happening, something important. "On my way," she said quickly, hanging up the phone. The study was quiet when Maya entered, Charles standing near the desk, a piece of paper in his hand. His jaw was tight, his face tense with concentration. "Maya," he began, his voice heavier than usual. "We've got a problem." Maya's heart sank. "What is it?" Charles slid the paper across the desk toward her. It was a printed email, the subject line bold and damning, "Private Investigator Report, Maya Williams." Her blood ran cold. She didn't need to read any further. She knew exactly what it was. Margaret had gone to great lengths to dig up anything she could on Maya, anything she could use against her. The email detailed Maya's past, her struggles, her hardships, the very things she had worked so hard to leave behind. Maya met Charles's gaze, her chest tightening. "She's using this against me?" Charles nodded, his expression hard. "She's already sent it to a few of my business partners. They're questioning your motives, your past. It's all about control, about making me doubt you." Maya took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she folded the paper. She had known Margaret would do this. She had known that her past would become ammunition in this war. "Charles," Maya said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I'm not going to let her win. This isn't just about my past. This is about Ethan's future. And I will do whatever it takes to protect him, even if that means standing up to Margaret, to you, to everyone." Charles's eyes softened, but the wariness remained. "I'm with you," he said quietly. "But we need to be careful. This is bigger than just us." Maya nodded. She didn't expect him to fully understand, not yet. But she wasn't backing down. She had come this far and she would finish what she had started. "Let's do this," Maya said, her voice firm. "We're not just going to fight back. We're going to expose the truth." Exposing the truth. The following days felt as if they were slipping away unnoticed, each one more fleeting than the last. Maya had been through a lot in her life. Too much, perhaps, but what she was facing now was different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control, rewriting the narrative, and fighting not just for herself, but for Ethan. Charles's support, though evident, remained tempered by caution. He was willing to stand by her, but there was always a hesitance, a subtle wariness that Maya could sense. It wasn't easy to erase years of conditioning, years of believing in the power of status and wealth, and Maya understood that. She didn't need his approval, she just needed his trust, and that, she could see, was slowly forming. But Margaret was still a force to be reckoned with, and Maya knew she had to do more than just protect Ethan. She had to expose the truth, bring everything into the light, where it could no longer be manipulated or twisted by the likes of Margaret. It was clear now. The media, the gossip, the whispers, they weren't going to go away. Margaret was using every tool at her disposal to tear down Maya's credibility, to make her seem like nothing more than an opportunist, a pawn in the Whitmore family's intricate game. But Maya wasn't just anyone. She wasn't about to let someone like Margaret dictate her life. Charles had made a commitment that night after the gala. He had promised Maya that he would stand up for her, but he knew they had to act quickly before Margaret could get ahead of them. It wasn't just about protecting Maya's reputation. It was about ensuring Ethan's future, about making sure he could continue to grow and thrive without the shadow of scandal hanging over him. Maya had made her own decision. She would no longer cower in the background, pretending to be something she wasn't. She was here to stay, and no one was going to take that from her. The day after their conversation in the study, Charles arranged for Maya to meet with Diane Cooper again. Diane had been the journalist who had interviewed Maya earlier, and now she would be the one to help them take control of the narrative. They knew this wouldn't be easy. Diane would be going up against some of the most influential people in the city, and Charles's family was not known for backing down quietly. But Diane was different. Maya had seen it in the way Diane had listened to her, in the way she had treated her as an equal, not a subject. She wasn't interested in creating a sensationalized story. She was interested in truth. And for that reason alone, Maya knew that she could trust her. The interview took place the following afternoon, in the estate's library. The sun streamed through the tall windows, casting a golden light across the room, and the cameras were discreetly placed, as they always were in these situations. Charles was there, of course, seated behind Maya, his presence a steadying influence. Maya was determined to speak the truth, but she knew that she had to remain calm and composed, even in the face of everything that had been done to undermine her. Diane began, her voice steady and professional. "Maya, let's start with a simple question. How long have you been working with Ethan?" Maya took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "I've been here for 7 months now. When I first arrived, Ethan couldn't even take a few steps without falling. He was discouraged, and no matter what therapies or specialists his father hired, it wasn't working. But I didn't come here to fix him. I came here to help him believe in himself again." Her voice was firm, but the words felt like a weight lifted off her chest. She wasn't here to prove anyone wrong. She was here because Ethan had put his trust in her. Diane nodded, her pen moving across the notepad. "So, when you arrived, what was your approach?" "I focused on making it fun. I wanted him to see every step as a victory, no matter how small. We would take things one step at a time, literally and figuratively. At first, it was about getting him to trust his own body again, to believe that he could walk without help." Maya paused, glancing down at her hands. The biggest challenge was protecting him from the people who saw him as a project, people who saw his progress as something to be measured, as though his worth could be defined by his physical ability alone. Diane leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Maya. "And how did Charles react to your methods?" Maya smiled faintly. "At first he didn't believe it would work. He didn't see how a woman like me, someone who didn't have Ivy League credentials or a fancy degree, could do what the top specialists couldn't. But I didn't need him to believe in me. I needed him to believe in Ethan, and slowly he started to see the change. As she spoke, Maya could feel the weight of Margaret's absence in the room, but it was a weight she didn't need to carry anymore. The truth was out there, and it was bigger than anything Margaret could try to hide behind. "Do you think Charles is starting to see you differently?" Diane asked, her tone soft but probing. Maya thought for a moment. "Yes, I do. He's learning that there's more to being a good parent than just having money or access to the best specialists. It's about being present, about seeing your child for who they are and not what they can do. That's what I've tried to show him." Diane nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like Ethan's progress is not just about physical therapy, but about trust and emotional healing too." Maya's eyes softened, her voice becoming more tender. "Yes, it's about trust. Ethan trusted me, and I trusted him. That's the foundation of everything we've accomplished so far." For the next few minutes, they discussed Ethan's improvements, his steps forward, and how Maya had been the constant in his life when everyone else had given up. She explained how Charles had come to appreciate her role, even if he didn't always fully understand it. And she spoke about Margaret too, the woman who had tried to tear her down with every whisper, every smear, every subtle dig. Maya didn't mince words when it came to Margaret's cruelty, but she also didn't let her take up space in the conversation. At the end of the interview, Diane leaned back in her chair, her eyes reflecting a mix of respect and curiosity. "Maya, what's next for you and Ethan? What's next for—" Maya smiled, a genuine, quiet joy filling her heart. "We keep moving forward, one step at a time, that's all we can do." Diane smiled in return, her pen still resting on the notepad. "I think that's a good place to leave it." As the cameras were turned off and the interview concluded, Maya felt a sense of relief. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could finally exhale. The path ahead would be hard, there was no doubt about that. But she knew she wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Charles stood and walked over to her, his eyes meeting hers. "You did well today," he said quietly. Maya's smile was small but sincere. "We did." Charles nodded, his expression softening just a little. "We'll keep fighting. For Ethan, for us, and for what's right." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. This wasn't just about Ethan's progress anymore. It was about standing up for the future they were building, together. A gathering of truth. The aftermath of the interview had left Maya feeling a strange sense of calm, though it wasn't without its undercurrents of tension. The words had been spoken, and the truth had been laid bare for all to see. But in a world where power, money, and influence held so much sway, Maya knew that exposing the truth wasn't always enough. It was only a step, a critical one, but just the beginning. Charles, though now increasingly on her side, still held on to the vestiges of his old world, the one where appearances mattered more than substance. That night, as he walked with Maya through the halls of the estate, there was a quiet understanding between them. The fight was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward winning. As they passed through the marble hallway, a question lingered in Maya's mind. How much longer could Charles resist the pressure from his family, particularly Margaret, who seemed to grow more desperate with every passing day? The following week, the answer came sooner than either of them had expected. Charles had organized a small dinner to celebrate Ethan's progress, a gathering that was supposed to bring together people who had supported the boy's development. It was meant to be a low-key event, free from the glitz and glamour of the usual Whitmore affairs. A private affair, just for those who truly mattered. Maya had spent the day preparing for it. In the kitchen, she made sure everything was perfect for Ethan. She could feel the boy's excitement as he helped her set the table, his little hands carefully arranging silverware and napkins with a sense of purpose. For him, this dinner wasn't just about food or company. It was a symbol of how far he had come. Maya could hardly believe how much progress he had made in such a short time. The first time she had seen him struggle to even take a few steps, she had known that it wasn't just about his legs. Ethan had to overcome a lifetime of fear, of feeling like he wasn't enough. Now with every step he took, she saw the growing confidence in his eyes, the belief that maybe, just maybe, he could do things other children did without hesitation. "Do you think we'll have cake for dessert, Maya?" Ethan asked eagerly as he finished arranging his chair at the table. He smiled up at her, his eyes full of hope. Maya laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "We'll see, sweetie. It depends on how the evening goes." In truth, Maya wasn't sure what to expect from the evening. She knew that there would be a great deal of tension. Charles's family, especially Margaret, would be there, and she was sure they would have questions. Questions about her role, about her presence in their world, about Ethan's progress. But for the first time, she wasn't worried. She had nothing to prove to anyone, especially to people who couldn't see her worth. The dinner began just as Maya had expected, awkward, tense, and laced with layers of unspoken judgments. Charles had invited a select group of close friends and colleagues, and the conversation danced around polite small talk, never quite settling on anything too personal. Maya took her place beside Ethan, doing her best to shield him from the subtle glances and murmurs from the guests. It was clear that some were still unsure of her place in the Whitmore household, but she wasn't about to let them intimidate her. At one point during the meal, Margaret arrived. She stepped into the room with the poise and elegance that had come to define her, but Maya could sense the coldness that followed her. Margaret's smile was forced as she greeted the others, her eyes lingering on Maya with a quiet disdain. "Maya," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I see you've settled in quite nicely." Maya didn't flinch. "I'm glad to be here, Margaret," she replied calmly. There was no need to rise to the bait. She had learned that silence often spoke louder than words. Charles, sensing the tension, stepped in with an easy smile. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle. We're here to celebrate Ethan's progress." But Margaret wasn't ready to let go. Her eyes narrowed as she turned toward Ethan, who was happily chattering away with the others at the table. "Yes, how lovely," she said with a hint of sarcasm. "It must be such a relief to have him walking again. I'm sure all your efforts have paid off." Maya took a deep breath, but this time she refused to be silent. She wasn't going to let Margaret belittle her efforts in front of everyone. "It's not just about walking," Maya said firmly, her voice steady. "It's about believing in yourself, finding the courage to take the next step no matter how small." The room fell silent, and for a brief moment, Margaret's facade wavered. But she quickly recovered, her sharp smile returning as she took a seat. Dinner continued in uneasy quiet, the subtle tension hanging over every conversation. Maya couldn't help but notice the way some of the guests were watching her, measuring her every word and action. It was a strange feeling, being scrutinized in such a way, but at the same time it reminded her of how far she had come. When the evening finally came to an end, Charles stood, raising his glass to toast Ethan. "To progress," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "And to the people who have helped make it possible." Maya clinked her glass against his, her smile genuine. This was her victory, not just because of Ethan's progress, but because she had learned to stand her ground in this world that didn't always want to accept her. She wasn't a guest in the Whitmore estate anymore. She was part of it, whether they liked it or not. As the guests began to leave, Maya stood by the door, watching Ethan's excited chatter and knowing that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The dinner had been a small battle, but in the grand scheme of things it was a victory. But as the last guest left and the estate began to settle into the quiet of the evening, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the road. Margaret's presence, though masked by politeness, had left a lasting impression, and Maya knew that she wasn't done with her yet. The battle for respect, for the future of Ethan, and for her place in this family was far from over. But in that moment, as she watched Ethan laughing with Charles, she felt the certainty that no matter what Margaret tried to throw their way, they would face it together. For Ethan, for the future, and for the truth. The struggle for control. The days following the dinner were quiet, but the undercurrent of tension in the house was undeniable. The air felt thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Charles, though more attuned to Maya's presence in the estate, still maintained his distance, caught between his loyalty to his son and the unrelenting pressure from his family, particularly Margaret. For the first time in his life, he was caught between two opposing forces, the one he had grown up with, filled with wealth, status, and tradition, and the one he was now beginning to recognize as his own heart, which was slowly learning to see beyond the surface. Maya spent her days focused on Ethan's recovery, teaching him new exercises and helping him build strength. But she could sense something was shifting. It wasn't just the way Charles was starting to treat her with a newfound respect, though that was part of it. It was the subtle way the staff in the house had begun to warm to her. It was the quiet nod of acknowledgement from the maids and the slight change in the way Charles's business associates spoke to her when they passed her in the hallways. It was as if, slowly but surely, Maya was becoming a permanent fixture in the Whitmore household. But Margaret's presence still lingered. Her words at the dinner, though veiled in a mask of civility, had hit Maya hard. The fact that Margaret hadn't let go of her judgment, her disdain, was something that still gnawed at Maya. Margaret hadn't given up on her quest to push Maya out of the picture. In her mind, Maya was still the outsider, the threat to her family's image. No matter how much Charles had started to stand up for Maya, Margaret's power was something he couldn't easily escape. Charles, for all his progress, was still torn. The pull of his family's expectations, particularly his mother's, weighed heavily on him. But each time he saw Ethan's progress, each time he saw the joy in his son's eyes, it became clearer that Maya wasn't just a caretaker. She was the one who had believed in Ethan when no one else had. She was the one who had given him hope. One morning, Charles stood in front of the large windows of the estate, looking out at the manicured gardens. Ethan was practicing walking outside, his steps still a little unsteady, but filled with determination. Maya was beside him, her gentle encouragements barely audible in the breeze. Charles felt a pang of guilt, watching them. He knew how much Maya had given to Ethan's recovery, but he also knew how much she had given up for that same cause. The world she came from was so far removed from his own, and that distance, both emotional and physical, had kept them apart for so long. Yet now, as he watched Ethan take another step, Charles began to understand that this wasn't just about saving his son. It was about the transformation that was happening within himself, too. He was learning that family didn't just mean blood ties or societal expectations. Family was about the people who showed up when you needed them the most, the ones who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. But even as this realization settled within him, the threat of Margaret's influence continued to loom. She wasn't someone who could be easily silenced. Her voice, though often quiet, held weight in certain circles. And as much as Charles wanted to resist her, he knew that the upcoming gala, an event that would bring together many of his business associates, was an opportunity for Margaret to once again seize control of the narrative. The day of the gala arrived, and with it came an air of unease. Maya was getting ready in her room, carefully choosing a deep green gown that felt both elegant and understated. The dress hugged her form in a way that felt right, neither too revealing nor too modest. It was a statement in its own way, one of quiet strength, of not needing to prove anything to anyone. When she stepped out into the hallway, Charles was already waiting, his tuxedo sharp and immaculate. He gave her a soft smile, one that carried both warmth and the faintest hint of vulnerability. For a moment, they simply stood there, exchanging a look that spoke volumes without words. "You look beautiful," Charles said, his voice low and sincere. Maya smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you. You ready for tonight?" he asked, his expression a little more guarded now. Maya nodded, though she couldn't help the feeling of trepidation that filled her chest. This wasn't just another charity event, it was another battlefield, and Margaret, as always, was right at the center of it. The evening started with the usual pomp and circumstance. The ballroom was glimmering under chandeliers, filled with laughter, polite chatter, and the clinking of glasses. Maya stood by Ethan, watching him interact with the guests. Though he was still nervous in large crowds, his confidence seemed to grow with each passing moment. His small steps were filled with purpose, and Maya's heart swelled with pride at how far he had come. But as the evening wore on, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret was waiting for her moment. It wasn't just the sharp glances or the subtle barbs she aimed at Maya during the evening's speeches. It was the way she made her presence known, always lurking, always watching, as if biding her time before making her next move. At one point during the evening, Margaret approached Charles and Maya, her lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I see you've invited your little caretaker tonight," she said, her voice just loud enough for others to hear. "How quaint." Maya refused to be drawn into Margaret's web. Instead, she met her gaze evenly and said, "I'm here because Ethan wanted me here, and I'm proud of the progress he's made." Margaret's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned her attention back to Charles. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Anything for Ethan. But I do wonder, Charles, how long this arrangement will last." Charles stiffened beside her, but Maya's resolve was unwavering. She wasn't about to let Margaret undermine her anymore. "As long as Ethan needs me," she replied firmly, her voice steady. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Margaret's eyes flicked between Maya and Charles, but she said nothing further. For the first time, Maya felt a small victory, a quiet but powerful one. Margaret had tried to make her feel small, but Maya stood tall, her voice steady and resolute. The night continued, but the weight of Margaret's words hung in the air. Maya knew that this battle wasn't over. She had won this small skirmish, but the war was far from finished. Still, as she watched Ethan smile, his small hand clutching hers, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't backing down. She was here for him, no matter the cost. And for the first time, she truly believed that. Margaret's retaliation. The night of the gala lingered in Maya's mind, a momentary triumph that felt both heavy and fragile. She could still hear Margaret's words echoing in her ears, but the silence that followed gave Maya a sense of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had stood her ground. For the first time, she had firmly planted her foot in the Whitmore household, and it felt solid beneath her. But she knew better than to think that silence meant victory. Margaret wasn't the type to sit idly by. If anything, she would only escalate her efforts to tear Maya down. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the estate seemed to shift. The staff had started treating Maya with a new respect, more than just the courtesy she had once received. The whispers in the halls had turned into conversations. The way people looked at her had changed, as though they were slowly beginning to see her not as an outsider, but as an integral part of the Whitmore household. Maya's presence had become a constant, and with it, so had her role in Ethan's progress. She had earned the trust of everyone around her, but the shadow of Margaret's disapproval still hung over them all. It wasn't until a week after the gala that Maya began to feel the full weight of what was coming. Charles, ever the calm figure, had been quieter in the days that followed. He was still warm toward her, still acknowledging her work with Ethan, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that Maya couldn't quite place. The stress from his sister's silent war against Maya was beginning to take its toll. It wasn't just about family anymore. It was about the image they projected, the public face they had built, and how quickly it could all come crumbling down. One afternoon, while Maya was working with Ethan in the library, a tall, thin man in a well-tailored suit appeared in the doorway. He was a stranger, but his demeanor suggested that he wasn't there to make friends. His cold, calculating eyes scanned the room as he stepped inside. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice sharp. "Charles sent me to talk to you." Maya put down the book she was holding for Ethan and rose slowly. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to keep the unease from her voice. The man, who introduced himself as Edward, a member of Charles's legal team, had come to deliver some news. Margaret was beginning to take her game to the next level. She wasn't just targeting Maya's reputation anymore. She was targeting her very right to be in the Whitmore estate, her very presence as Ethan's caregiver. The legal documents that Edward handed over to her were a clear indication of that. The papers were filled with a litany of accusations, each one more absurd than the last, claiming that Maya was unfit to care for Ethan, that she had a criminal past she was hiding, and that she was a manipulator trying to ingratiate herself into the family's wealth and status. Maya's heart sank as she read through the pages, the familiar weight of being judged and scrutinized weighing down on her chest. She had been prepared for this, of course. She had known that Margaret would never stop, but seeing it in black and white, in the form of legal threats and accusations, was another thing entirely. Edward, who had been watching her as she read, spoke again. "Margaret's trying to undermine your credibility in the eyes of Charles, the press, and the public. She's working on her own narrative, and she's not afraid to take things further. You need to be prepared for what's coming." Maya felt her stomach tighten. She had been prepared for the small jabs and the passive-aggressive remarks, but this was a full-scale assault. "I'll handle it," Maya said quietly, looking up from the papers. "But I won't let her use Ethan as a pawn in her game." Edward nodded, as if he understood. "Just know that Charles isn't blind to it. He's fighting in his own way. But Margaret is ruthless. She knows exactly what she's doing." The man left shortly after, leaving Maya to process the heavy news. She looked at Ethan, who was busy stacking wooden blocks in front of her, unaware of the storm that was brewing just outside the walls of their little world. "I won't let her win, Ethan," Maya whispered to herself, her heart filled with a determination that she hadn't known was there. Over the next few days, the situation began to escalate. Maya knew that Margaret was behind every action, every word, and every piece of gossip. The tabloid stories began to grow more sensational, more personal. Each article twisted the narrative of Maya's life, casting her in a light that no one who truly knew her could recognize. But Margaret's campaign wasn't limited to the media. Maya started to notice strange things around the estate, small, almost imperceptible signs that someone was watching, lurking in the shadows. At first, it was just a sense of unease, a feeling that something wasn't right. But then it became clear. Someone had been following her. Someone had been taking photographs, documenting her every move. One day, while Maya was walking Ethan through the garden, she noticed a figure standing just beyond the gates of the estate. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and had a camera slung over their shoulder. When they saw Maya's eyes lock onto them, they quickly disappeared into the bushes. Maya's heart raced. It was only a glimpse, but it was enough. She knew exactly who it was. The very next day, Charles called her into his study. There was an air of tension between them, as if he too had begun to sense the weight of Margaret's influence closing in on them. "She's gone too far," Charles said, his voice tight with frustration. "She's hired someone to follow you, Maya, to spy on us. I'm not going to stand by and let her tear this apart." Maya's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long while, she saw something in Charles's face that wasn't just about protecting his legacy, it was about protecting her, too. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. Charles wasn't just seeing her as a caretaker anymore. He was beginning to see her as someone he needed, as someone who was as integral to Ethan's life as he was. "I'll take care of this," Maya said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We'll stop her. Together." Charles nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. Margaret might have been pulling all the strings from the shadows, but it was time to bring her into the light. They couldn't hide anymore. They couldn't run. It was time to fight back. And so their war with Margaret began in earnest. They started gathering evidence, preparing their counterattack. With Charles's legal team behind them, they began to turn the tables on Margaret, using the same tools she had used against them: media, public opinion, and most importantly, the truth. The battle was far from over, but for the first time Maya felt like she had a chance, and she wasn't going to let Margaret take that away. The rising tension. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and preparations. Charles had made it clear that there would be no more running from Margaret's attacks. This time they were going to face her head-on. Maya couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. She had been fighting alone for so long, but now she had Charles's backing. She wasn't just a caretaker anymore. She was a key part of this battle, and together, they were about to rewrite the narrative. As the days unfolded, Maya saw more of the subtle changes in Charles. He was no longer the cold, calculating businessman she had first met. There was warmth in his actions, in the way he interacted with her and Ethan. He was becoming someone she could rely on, someone who was starting to see the value in her presence beyond just the practical. And, as he began to change, so did the dynamic between them. There were moments of quiet understanding, of shared purpose that made her believe the fight was worth it. But despite the small victories, the weight of the situation hung heavily over them all. Margaret's actions had made it clear that she wouldn't stop until she had won, and that meant hurting Maya. It wasn't just about the media or the public eye. It was about breaking Maya's spirit, driving her out, and proving that she didn't belong in the Whitmore family's world. One afternoon, as Maya sat in the living room with Ethan, working through his therapy exercises, she was startled by the sound of someone knocking at the door. She looked at Ethan, who was sitting on the floor, and excused herself. When she opened the door, she was faced with a familiar sight, a manila envelope, this time sealed with a heavy black wax emblem. A chill ran down her spine. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside the envelope was a single letter, written in the same neat looping script as before. As she read it, her blood ran cold. It was from Margaret, and it was nothing short of a threat. "If you're still here after all this, I'll make sure you leave in pieces. You've crossed a line and it's too late to turn back. If you want to protect Ethan, you'll step away from him. The choice is yours." Maya's hand trembled as she placed the letter down. Her heart was hammering in her chest. Margaret had already made it clear that she would stop at nothing. But this was different. This was a direct threat not just to her, but to Ethan, the one person she couldn't bear to lose. Charles entered the room moments later, a frown creasing his forehead as he noticed the letter in Maya's hands. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. Maya didn't say anything at first. She handed him the letter, her eyes locked onto his. She had never seen him look so serious. "We need to put a stop to this now," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "She's going to escalate, and I can't sit by and wait for her to make her next move." Charles stood there for a moment, the letter in his hands, his jaw clenching with frustration. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. Maya knew he was already making plans, already taking action. Later that night, when the estate had settled into quiet, Maya found herself in the kitchen making tea for herself. It had become her routine, an attempt to find some semblance of peace in the chaos. But the calm was short-lived. She heard footsteps approaching from behind and turned to find Charles standing in the doorway. His face was set in a mask of determination. "We're not letting her win this," he said quietly, his tone heavy with resolve. "We're going to take this to the public. We'll use everything we have against her, and we'll make sure she can't hurt you or Ethan again." Maya's heart clenched. She had known he would act, but hearing it in his voice made it real. This wasn't just about the Whitmore name anymore. This was about Ethan's future and the people who would fight for him. "I'm not backing down," Maya replied, her voice firm, her resolve just as strong as his. "Not for anything. I'll fight for him. I'll fight for us." Charles met her gaze, his eyes intense. For a moment neither of them spoke, then he nodded, his expression softening. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you will." And just like that, Maya realized something. They were in this together truly. No more masks, no more distance. The fight against Margaret had become something more than just a battle for her place in the family. It had become a fight for the future of the Whitmore legacy. But more importantly, it was a fight for Ethan, for the child who had trusted her when no one else did. And that, above all else, was something she wouldn't let go. The next day, Charles called in his legal team. The decision had been made. They would fight back, not in the shadows, but in the full light of day. They would expose Margaret's tactics, her manipulation, and her cruelty for all to see. There was no turning back now. Maya watched as the plans began to take shape. Charles was right. This was more than just a legal battle. This was about fighting for the truth, for the right to stand tall and proud in the face of prejudice, and she was ready for it. The media began to pick up on the whispers, the rumors that had been circulating for weeks. They were starting to ask questions about the Whitmore family and about Maya's role in Ethan's progress. And when the press caught wind of Margaret's smear campaign, they were quick to dig deeper. But this time, they didn't have the upper hand. Maya and Charles had already prepared their response, their narrative ready to unfold. It wasn't about who had the most money or the most influence. It was about who stood by their principles, who fought for what was right. And Maya, for the first time in her life, felt truly powerful. The battle in the courtroom. The day of the court hearing had arrived. Maya could feel the weight of the moment settling over her like a heavy fog. It wasn't just about the legal case anymore. It wasn't just about Margaret's smear campaign or the threats she had made. This was a battle for Ethan's future, a fight to protect him from the shadows of cruelty and prejudice that had followed him around for too long. Charles had arranged for the best legal team money could buy, but it wasn't the law that Maya was relying on today, it was the truth. And the truth, no matter how hard it was to accept, would speak louder than any accusation or lie. It had to. The courtroom was stark, cold. Maya sat beside Charles, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her thoughts racing. She had been through many things in her life, but this was different. This wasn't a fight for survival. This was a fight for dignity, for respect. This was the kind of battle that shaped lives, and she wasn't about to back down. As they entered the courtroom, Maya noticed the stares, the whispers. It was as if she were the elephant in the room, a foreign presence in a space that wasn't meant for her. The cold, disapproving glances of some of the people present in the courtroom sent a chill through her. They saw her as nothing more than an outsider, a woman who didn't belong. But Maya wasn't the same person she had been when she first walked into the Whitmore estate. She wasn't that woman who had stayed silent out of fear. She had seen the truth. She had seen what Ethan was capable of, what they could achieve together. And she knew that no matter how much Margaret tried to twist the story, the truth would be undeniable. The courtroom filled with tense anticipation as both sides prepared to present their cases. Margaret's legal team, all sharp suits and expensive smiles, stood across from Charles's team, and then in walked Margaret herself. Her presence was as commanding as ever, dressed in her signature style, perfectly tailored, every inch of her appearing immaculate and controlled. It was as if she had perfected the art of blending in while still standing out. Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of disdain as she looked at Margaret. This woman, who had manipulated every situation for her own gain, who had used her wealth and influence to bully those who were weaker, was now trying to tear apart the very people who had shown her kindness. It was a chilling reminder of how power could be used to exploit the vulnerable. Margaret took her seat with an air of superiority, casting one last glance at Maya before focusing on the proceedings. The lawyer for the opposing side stood up and began speaking, outlining their case, making insinuations about Maya's fitness to care for Ethan, and questioning her qualifications. They painted her as an opportunist, someone who had wormed her way into the Whitmore family for personal gain. But Maya wasn't intimidated. She knew the truth. She knew her worth. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she stood up slowly, her legs feeling momentarily unsteady beneath her. The silence in the room pressed in on her, but she held her head high and walked to the stand. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, scrutinizing her every movement, judging her for something she couldn't control. But she was ready. For once, she wasn't going to let anyone define her. The judge, an older man with a lined face and a stern expression, nodded for her to begin. Maya took a deep breath and looked at the audience. She wasn't speaking to Margaret or the lawyers or anyone in the room. She was speaking to Ethan, to the little boy who had trusted her with his future. "I'm not here to justify myself," Maya began, her voice steady. "I am not here to prove that I'm perfect or that I've done everything right. I'm here because a little boy named Ethan Whitmore believes in me. He believes in the progress we've made, the steps we've taken together, and I believe in him too." She paused, glancing at Charles, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. She could feel his support, and it gave her strength. She knew that she wasn't alone in this fight. "I've been a caretaker for a long time," she continued, "but that's not all I am. I'm someone who sees potential in others. I see the person, not the status, not the title, not the expectations. When I came to the Whitmore estate, I didn't come because of money or prestige. I came because I saw Ethan's potential, and I knew I could help him." The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "I've spent every day with him, helping him take those steps, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And not just for his health, but for his dignity. I'm here to protect him, not just from physical harm, but from people who don't see him for who he truly is. He's not a pawn. He's not a tool to be used for someone's agenda. He is a child who deserves a future. She turned to face the judge, her gaze unwavering. Ethan is not the product of money or degrees. He's not the result of some elite specialist's expertise. He is the result of hard work, belief, and love. He's a little boy who just wants to walk, just wants to live his life without fear. And that's what I'm fighting for. Maya took a step back, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to speak her truth. She wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right, even if the world around her didn't agree. The judge didn't speak immediately. He sat back in his chair, eyes focused on Maya as though weighing her words. Finally, he nodded and looked at the opposing lawyer. "Your witness," he said. Maya's heart was still racing, but she knew one thing for sure. She had said what needed to be said. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time she felt like they were on the path to winning. A shift in the winds. The court was still and tense as Maya returned to her seat, her hands trembling slightly. The weight of her words hung in the air like an electric charge. She felt eyes on her, some curious, others judgmental, but none of that mattered anymore. For the first time, she wasn't fighting just for survival. She was fighting for something far more important. Ethan's right to a future free from prejudice and manipulation. Charles leaned slightly towards her, offering a quiet, encouraging smile. His earlier coldness had melted away, replaced by a quiet respect. The walls that had been built between them over time were crumbling, not because of grand gestures, but because of simple truth. They were fighting for the same cause now, and that made all the difference. The opposing lawyer had already risen to begin his cross-examination, his tone calculated and sharp. He began to question Maya's methods, trying to discredit her work with Ethan by focusing on her lack of formal qualifications. But every question was met with Maya's steady, unshakable responses. She wasn't just defending herself, she was defending Ethan, and no matter what they threw at her, she would stand firm. "Miss Williams," the lawyer began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've spent what, a few months working with Ethan? That's hardly enough time to even begin understanding his condition, let alone providing him with the care he needs. Yet you claim to have helped him walk. How can you possibly expect anyone to believe that your methods, based on nothing but your belief in him, are legitimate?" Maya's eyes never wavered. She knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to paint her as a fraud, to turn the spotlight on her perceived lack of credentials. But the truth was, she didn't need a piece of paper to prove her worth. She had Ethan. She had his progress. And that was enough. "I'm not a doctor," Maya replied calmly. "But I'm not trying to be one. I'm a caregiver. And more than that, I'm someone who believes in the power of encouragement, in the power of seeing someone for who they truly are, not just for what they can or can't do. When I started working with Ethan, it wasn't just about getting him to walk. It was about giving him the courage to try. The doctors and specialists, they focused on the physical, and that's important, of course. But what they missed was his spirit, his hope." The lawyer opened his mouth to respond, but Maya didn't give him the chance. "I didn't fix him," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't perform some miracle. I simply believed in him when no one else did. And that belief, that support, it made all the difference." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. The opposing lawyer had no immediate response, so he sat down, his face twisted with frustration. Maya sat back in her seat, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected it to be easy, but the weight of this moment was immense. She could see it in Charles's face, a mix of admiration and something deeper, perhaps regret. He had underestimated her. He had assumed she was just a maid, someone who didn't belong in this world of privilege and power. But now, as he watched her handle herself with grace and conviction, he realized just how wrong he had been. The judge, a man with years of experience in cases like this, leaned forward slightly. "We'll take a short recess," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Please be back in 15 minutes. Maya stood up slowly, feeling the tension in her muscles loosen a little. She had done it. She had spoken her truth, and for once it was enough. As she walked toward the back of the courtroom, she could feel Charles's eyes on her, the respect in them palpable. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, she felt like they were on the edge of winning. The battle wasn't over yet, but they had made a significant step forward. And with every step Ethan took, every moment of progress, Maya knew that she was doing the right thing. She wasn't just here to fight Margaret, she was here to fight for Ethan's future. Outside the courtroom, the air was crisp, and the sunlight cut through the building's towering windows, casting sharp shadows across the floor. Maya stepped outside, her thoughts still racing. She needed a moment to breathe, to calm her nerves. As she leaned against the cool stone wall of the courthouse, she heard footsteps behind her. Charles had followed her out. "I've never seen you like that," he said quietly, his voice low but full of sincerity. "I didn't know you had it in you." Maya smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I didn't know either," she admitted, her voice soft. "But sometimes you find strength in places you didn't know existed." Charles studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "You were right, Maya. I've been wrong about a lot of things, but this isn't one of them. You're doing something no one else could." Maya's heart swelled at his words, but she didn't let herself get carried away. There was still a long way to go, and the road ahead would only get more difficult. Margaret wasn't the type to accept defeat easily, and Maya knew that even if they won this case, there would always be new battles to fight. But for the first time, she felt like she was on the right side of this fight, and that was something worth fighting for. The storm before the calm. As the days passed, Maya felt a shift in the air around her. The court case, the growing tension with Margaret, and the constant media circus all seemed to blend into one overwhelming storm. Yet, for the first time since stepping into the Whitmore household, Maya began to feel a sense of stability. Ethan was progressing at a steady pace, and even Charles, though still deeply entrenched in his family's expectations, had started to show signs of change. She could see it in the small things, the way he began to make eye contact when he spoke to her, the quiet respect in his voice when he addressed her in front of Ethan, and most tellingly, the way he had defended her in the courtroom. Still, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting just around the corner. Margaret hadn't stopped, and Maya knew that her enemy was not the type to simply accept defeat. No, Margaret would fight back, and Maya had learned long ago that when someone like Margaret was cornered, they became even more dangerous. That afternoon, Maya found herself sitting with Ethan in the garden, helping him with his walking exercises. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, and the sound of the koi pond's trickling water provided a soothing backdrop. Ethan was determined to take another step today, his tiny fingers clinging to Maya's hand for support. "You're doing great, Ethan," Maya encouraged, smiling warmly at him. "Just one more step." Ethan took a deep breath, steadying himself before he took that final step, his small feet wobbling slightly before he regained his balance. Maya couldn't help but clap her hands, a wide grin spreading across her face. "You did it. I did it!" Ethan's voice was full of pride as he beamed at her. "Look, Maya, I can walk all by myself." Maya felt a rush of emotion as she looked down at Ethan's beaming face. This was what it was all about. It wasn't about fighting against Margaret or proving anyone wrong. It was about helping Ethan find his strength, helping him believe in himself. And in this moment, she knew she had done something right. This was what mattered. But as she knelt to give him a high five, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She reached for it reluctantly, already feeling the knot of tension in her chest. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but she had learned to trust her instincts when it came to these things. The last time she had received a mysterious call, it had led to the discovery of the surveillance footage of her in the garden. The feeling of dread that settled in her stomach told her that this might not be different. She stepped away from Ethan for a moment, keeping her voice low so he wouldn't hear her conversation. "Hello?" A cold, familiar voice greeted her from the other end. "Maya Williams." Margaret's voice was smooth, but laced with something dark and menacing. "I see you've been playing the hero quite well." Maya's grip on her phone tightened. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I think you know what I want," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "You've made your choice. And now it's time for you to realize the consequences of it." Maya's mind raced. She had expected this. Margaret wasn't the type to back down. "I'm not afraid of you," Maya said, her voice steady despite the growing anxiety gnawing at her insides. "You can't intimidate me." Margaret's laughter echoed through the phone, cold and calculating. "Intimidation is just the beginning, Maya. I've been patient, but that patience is running thin. Don't think for a second that you can just waltz into my world and expect to walk out unscathed. I have everything I need to destroy you." Maya clenched her jaw, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles whitened. "If you think for 1 second that I'm going to let you tear my life apart, you're wrong. I'm here for Ethan, not you, and I will protect him at all costs." Margaret's tone shifted, a sly edge creeping into her voice. "You can protect him all you want, Maya, but the truth is, he's just another pawn in my game. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself out of this family sooner than you think." The call abruptly ended, and Maya stood there for a moment, her chest rising and falling with a mixture of rage and fear. This was no longer just about defending herself. This was about protecting Ethan and showing Charles that he couldn't let Margaret control everything in his life. Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself. She walked back to Ethan, who was waiting for her with his small arms stretched wide, his smile lighting up the garden. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan," Maya said, her voice full of affection as she kneeled to wrap him in a hug. "You're getting stronger every day." Ethan beamed, oblivious to the weight of the conversation Maya had just had. "Can we walk to the pond today, Maya?" "I want to see the fish again." Maya's heart ached, but she nodded. "Of course, let's go." As they walked toward the koi pond together, Maya felt the looming presence of Margaret's threat still hanging over her. But she was determined not to let it affect Ethan. He needed her to be strong, and for his sake, she would be. The weight of truth. The following days were tense. Every time the doorbell rang or the phone buzzed, Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had learned to brace herself for whatever new challenge Margaret might throw her way, but the emotional toll was starting to wear on her. Ethan was still making progress, his confidence growing with each passing day, but Maya knew the storm was far from over. The media had shifted its focus from Ethan's progress to the growing tension within the Whitmore family, and with each new headline, it became harder to ignore the weight of the situation. One morning, as the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Maya found herself staring blankly at the newspaper Charles had left on the table. The front page had an article about her and Ethan, the headline bold and accusatory. "The Whitmore family's mysterious caretaker. Who is Maya Williams?" Beneath it, there was a picture of her helping Ethan walk in the garden, her hand hovering just above his waist. It seemed innocent enough, but the subtext was clear. Who was she really, and what was her true relationship with the Whitmore family? Maya felt a pang in her chest. She had never wanted to be a public figure, but now it seemed like her entire life was under scrutiny. The accusations, the questions, the whispers, none of it felt fair. But she knew that if she let it break her, then she would lose everything she had worked so hard to build. She would lose Ethan. As she sipped her coffee, Maya's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hall. Charles entered the kitchen, his face grim as he glanced at the newspaper. "Margaret's doing everything she can to paint you as a threat," he said, his voice low. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Maya, but we can't let her win." Maya took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "I don't care about what she says. I care about Ethan. He's the only thing that matters to me." Charles nodded, his expression softening. "I know. But this isn't just about Margaret anymore. It's about us too. We need to take control of this situation, show the world that we're not going to let her tear us apart." Maya was silent for a moment, then spoke with quiet resolve. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect Ethan. I'm not running from her anymore." Charles placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "Neither am I. We'll face this together. All of us." The conversation hung in the air between them for a moment, charged with unspoken understanding. Neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain. They couldn't let Margaret's poison seep into their lives any longer. They had to fight back. As the days went by, the media storm continued to swirl around them. The press seemed to have a never-ending appetite for scandal, and the Whitmore name only seemed to attract more attention. Maya's face was everywhere, on newsstands, in social media posts, and on the front pages of gossip magazines. but she refused to let it consume her. She focused on Ethan, his laughter filling the house like the sound of music, his joy reminding her of why she was there. One evening, after a long day of therapy with Ethan, Charles invited Maya to join him in the study. He had a serious look on his face, and Maya knew something was about to change. "I've been thinking about how to handle Margaret," he began, his voice firm. "And I think it's time we expose the truth about her. Not just her lies about you, but everything she's done to undermine Ethan's progress." Maya raised an eyebrow, unsure where he was going with this. "What do you mean?" Charles stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a folder filled with documents. "We have enough evidence now. The media, the harassment, the threats. It's all tied to her. But we can't just sit back and wait for her to strike again. We need to take action." Maya's heart raced. "What are you suggesting?" "We go public with everything," Charles said, his tone resolute. "I've arranged for an exclusive interview with a trusted journalist, someone who can help us tell the truth without sensationalizing it. We'll show the world who Margaret really is." Maya felt a surge of emotion, her mind racing as she processed what Charles was saying. Going public meant exposing everything, the good and the bad. It meant putting Ethan's progress in the spotlight once again, but this time, the focus would be on the truth. "I don't want to drag Ethan into this," Maya said, her voice quiet. "He's been through enough." Charles nodded, understanding her concern. "I know. That's why I'll make sure he's not in the interview. This is about you, Maya, your dedication to Ethan, your strength in the face of Margaret's cruelty. You deserve to be heard." Maya hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Let's do it." The interview was scheduled for the following week. Charles's legal team worked behind the scenes to ensure everything was in place. Meanwhile, Maya spent her days with Ethan, helping him with his therapy, practicing his walking, and keeping his spirits high. It was a delicate balance, keeping him focused on his progress while preparing for the storm that was about to break. The day of the interview arrived, and Maya felt a sense of dread settle in her chest. She knew this was a pivotal moment in her life, and she couldn't afford to let her fear show. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple, elegant outfit that would put the focus on her words, not her appearance. As she sat down in front of the camera, the familiar weight of the world seemed to shift. She was no longer just a maid in the Whitmore household. She was a woman with a purpose. She was a protector, a mother figure to a child who needed her. And this time, she wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. The interview began, and the journalist asked her to recount her journey with Ethan. Maya spoke about the challenges they had faced, the setbacks, and the small victories that had made it all worth it. She didn't hold back. She spoke about the countless hours spent with Ethan, the moments when he had surprised everyone, and the joy she felt when he took his first unassisted steps. But as the interview continued, the tone shifted. The journalist asked about the threats, the harassment, and the smear campaign that Margaret had orchestrated. Maya's voice wavered for a moment, but she didn't let the emotion overwhelm her. She told the truth, laying bare everything that had happened. How Margaret had tried to tear her down, how she had used her power to destroy Maya's reputation, and how she had tried to drive a wedge between her and Ethan. When the interview ended, Maya felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The truth had been spoken, but she knew the consequences would come. Margaret wouldn't take this lying down. But for the first time in a long time, Maya felt a sense of peace. She had stood her ground. She had fought for Ethan, and now there was nothing left to hide. The final confrontation. The week following the interview felt strangely quiet. For once, the cameras stopped flashing at the gates, the whispers from the staff faded, and the usual tension within the Whitmore estate seemed to dissipate, albeit temporarily. Maya knew better than to believe the calm was permanent. Margaret's silence spoke volumes, a silent prelude to whatever move she planned next. But for the first time, Maya had allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in months: hope. As the days passed, the media storm slowly shifted. Headlines began to praise Ethan's progress. There were articles about his determination, his courage, and the unwavering support Maya had given him. People began to see the truth, and slowly, Margaret's narrative was falling apart. It was almost as if the universe had decided it was time for the Whitmore family's darkest secrets to be exposed. But with every victory, Maya knew there was always another battle ahead. Margaret wasn't someone who could be easily defeated. She would find a way to push back. Maya braced herself for the inevitable next move. One morning, just as Maya was getting ready to leave for Ethan's therapy session, she received a message from Charles. It was brief, but enough to send a chill down her spine. "We need to talk. It's about Margaret." Maya's heart raced as she read the message. Was this the endgame? Had Margaret finally resorted to more drastic measures? She quickly made her way to Charles's study, her mind spinning with possibilities. When she arrived, Charles was already seated at his desk, a folder open in front of him. His face was tense, his brow furrowed with concern. "I just got a call from my lawyer," he said, looking up at her. "We've hit a snag." Maya sat down across from him, her nerves fraying. "What's happened? What's she doing now?" Charles sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what I expected. Margaret's legal team has filed a motion for a restraining order. They're accusing you of putting Ethan in danger. They're claiming that your presence in the household is causing more harm than good. They want to remove you from the estate." Maya's stomach twisted. It was exactly what she feared. Margaret was escalating, and this time, it was personal. This was no longer just a battle for reputation or influence. It was a fight for her place in Ethan's life. "What do we do?" Maya asked, her voice shaky. "How do we fight this?" "We take it to court," Charles said firmly. "We prove once and for all that you're not just some hired help. You're the reason Ethan is walking. You've done more for him than anyone else. And now, it's time to make that clear to the world." Maya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this would be a tough battle. But for Ethan, she would fight. She wouldn't back down. The court date was set for the following week. The days leading up to it felt like an eternity. Maya spent her time focusing on Ethan, keeping him grounded, making sure he continued his progress despite the growing tension around them. But every time she caught a glimpse of the media headlines or heard the whispers from the staff, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. When the day of the court hearing arrived, Maya stood in front of the courthouse, her nerves on edge. The usual crowd of photographers and reporters had gathered outside, eager to capture any moment of drama that might unfold. Maya felt the weight of their stares, the flashes of cameras that seemed to capture every movement, every expression. But she didn't let it deter her. She knew why she was there. She was there for Ethan. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Margaret's lawyer stood across from Maya's legal team, their expressions cold and calculating. Margaret herself sat in the back of the room, her eyes fixed on Maya with an expression that could only be described as disdain. It was clear she saw this as a final game, one that she intended to win at all costs. As the proceedings began, Maya could feel the weight of every word. Margaret's lawyer presented their case first, painting Maya as a danger to Ethan's well-being, claiming that her presence in the Whitmore household was causing emotional instability. They cited the media scrutiny, the accusations against Maya, and even brought up the photograph of her and Ethan that had been circulated by the gossip blogs. It was all an attempt to discredit her, to make her seem like a liability. But when it was Maya's turn to speak, she didn't flinch. She took the stand with confidence, her voice steady and unwavering as she spoke of the months she had spent with Ethan. She spoke of the small victories, the steps he had taken, the smiles they shared. She spoke of the bond they had formed, a bond built on trust and belief. And she spoke of the one thing that no one could deny. She had given Ethan something that no expert or therapist had been able to provide, a reason to believe in himself. The room fell silent as Maya finished speaking. She had told the truth, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. This battle wasn't just about her. It was about Ethan, his future, and the love they had fought to protect. The judge listened intently, her expression unreadable as she took in the testimony. When the verdict came, it was a moment of pure relief. The judge ruled in favor of Maya, denying Margaret's request for a restraining order. "There is no evidence to support the claim that Maya Williams is a danger to Ethan Whitmore," the judge stated, her voice firm. "The bond between Maya and Ethan is undeniable. The court recognizes the positive impact she has had on his progress." The weight that had been pressing down on Maya's chest for weeks lifted in an instant. She had won. Margaret had lost. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was only a victory in one battle of a much larger war. Later that day, as Maya returned to the estate, Charles met her at the door, his face lighting up with relief. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You proved everyone wrong." Maya smiled, her heart full. "We did it, all of us." As they walked into the house, Ethan ran toward her, his little face beaming. "Maya, you did it! You won!" Maya crouched down to his level, her heart swelling with love. "We won, Ethan, we all did." And in that moment, Maya knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always stand by Ethan's side. Together they had fought for a future built on love, trust, and perseverance. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Maya felt ready to face whatever came next. In life, true strength is often not measured by status, wealth, or education, but by the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it feels like the world is against you. Maya's journey teaches us that resilience, integrity, and empathy can break through the barriers of prejudice and adversity. The key lesson here is that our value is not defined by others' opinions or societal norms, but by our ability to show up, keep going, and never lose sight of what truly matters. It's about seeing the potential in others, even when they're dismissed, and fighting for what's just, regardless of the cost. Like Maya, we can all be a beacon of hope for others, helping them realize their worth when the world tries to tell them otherwise. It's a reminder that the battles we face, no matter how personal or difficult, shape our character and our legacy. We don't need to be perfect, but we do need to be unwavering in our commitment to kindness, respect, and doing the right thing, especially when no one is watching. As the story unfolds, we realize how one small gesture can change everything. But the journey isn't over yet. There's more to be revealed. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know. And if you enjoyed today's story, be sure to check out our next one, where we'll dive even deeper into these themes of change and connection. Subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories that touch the heart, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your voice matters.